for tea today, Jane?
Oh, I just love to have the chance to get my mother's hand-painted china out and use it.
She has so many beautiful pieces, and you have them all around the house. Today, though, we're going to look at some other florals, and we're going to decorate the tea room.
Well, grab your cup and let's go.
Quilt Central is made possible in part by Bernina of America. Nothing sews like a Bernina. Nothing. Quilting Machines International, providing quilting machines and supplies for the world. Sulky of America, taking creativity to new heights with decorated threads, stabilizers, and books. American Professional Quilting Systems, hand-guided elegance. The American Quilter Society, dedicated to promoting today's quilter. Paducah, McCracken County Convention and Visitors Bureau, Paducah, where no one is a stranger. Additional funding was provided by these companies that care about quilting. Welcome to Quilt Central, celebrating quilting in everyday living, with your hosts, Jane Donaldson and Donna Wilder.
Today we're going to be making over a room that we're calling our tea room. Let's take a look at the before. And now, let's take a look at what we have done to make this room so spectacular. Our decorator, William Paul McDaniel, who we affectionately call Billy, has transformed it into a beautiful garden room. It has wonderful flower arrangements, and along with that, we've created some very attractive pieces for the wall that carry along the floral theme. The first one is a bouquet of flowers. This was created by Cindy Walter in her snippet technique. The next one is also one that we'll be demonstrating later on, and this one is, again, another floral design, but this one's perfect for beginners. And last is this beautiful trip around the world with the topiary painted in the center of it. This magnificent piece was created by my guest today. Joining me is Joyce Drexler, who is with Sulky of America. Welcome, Joyce.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Donna. And I have a wonderful technique to show about painting appliques and putting them on quilts as trapunto, raised look.
That quilt is so lovely, and the fabrics look just great in it.
Oh, they do, don't they? What you want to do when you pick out your fabrics is to pick out paints that will go with it if you're going to paint your applique.
So show me how we did this.
Okay, first, of course, we're making a foundation, which is a trip around the world, which is a very simple strip piece quilt.
Right.
And we do it in units of different sections here because this way, if you want to rearrange your blocks, you can. Later, we'll show a couple of side trips that I call, where we just took one end and put it on the other, and it's called a side trip then.
Good.
And so all you do is just piece it together, matching your seams.
I'll take that away.
If you had a different quilt back that you'd like to use, you could use that too.
Okay.
But we really like that look of having a layered effect. Now, to get ready to paint, I like to use this dyers cloth. It absorbs the paint very well. But to support it while I'm painting it, I put on this sticky type stabilizer. And if you could hold the other end for me, it's just real easy to pull that off and smooth it out. Having that release sheet makes it simpler. And, you know, if you didn't get it quite right, which I didn't because I didn't have it pulled straight there.
Just smooth it back out.
Right. It's very usable. And then you would use this side after you've straightened it out, and you would take the pattern piece.
And these patterns, I understand, are in full size in the back of the book, which is nice.
Yes, and they're all shaded to show you how to paint, or you can do them as appliques if you wish. Carol Ingram designed this.
Oh, it's just lovely.
And you would just lay that underneath and trace it with a pencil. Now, I use a light box when I trace, but you might need to use a window if you don't have that.
Right.
And that gets the pattern then onto the fabric.
Before you do that, one thing you've done is to put the stabilizer behind the pattern, which is great.
Anytime you have a tissue pattern, it's really a good idea to put the iron-on type stabilizer on the back. before you cut out your pattern pieces. And then they're much more durable because they're all done on tissue.
And you know, you always find that one pattern you love, particularly in garments, I know.
Yes, it's used over and over.
And they start to get, you can hardly touch them, but this is a great way to preserve them.
This is what I do with all those tissue patterns.
That's great.
Thanks for pointing that out. The next step then is to actually show the painted process, and it's all step-by-step in the book on how to do the painting. And as you can see, you're going to be putting a lot of medium and a lot of water, like a wash, and we do that with the big brush and the medium. And I like to use this particular kind of paint because it does make this soft and not real hard like some of the paints do. And then as you're doing your painting, you can just use your number 10 pointed brush and simply make these leaves very simply by just brushing them
You
off.
always make things look so simple, and I'm sure that it didn't take you very long. It would take me forever to do
Oh,
this.
it really doesn't. You'd have so much fun painting this, believe me.
That's great. Now you want this piece
Once
over?
you have it painted, yes, you need to apply it to the, let's just get it all away.
Okay.
We need to apply it to the actual background.
All right.
And I do this after I've got the borders and everything on the quilt. And you want to start off by clipping away the excess fabric. And we put these little clips in, like you do on any curved area.
Right.
And then just fold them under like that.
Okay.
And that will keep our deal in place. I like to also use the spray, temporary spray adhesive, to keep it down, not shifting while I'm doing this process. Then you'll want to use your invisible thread, the polyester invisible, and go around along the edge, making sure that it's all sewn down. Now, I had embellished this before I put it on the quilt, and that way I have a smaller piece to handle. But I leave some of the leaves to extend off after I've quilted the whole thing.
Okay.
Now, in order to get the batting in place,
All right.
because there is a very thick loft type batting. The next step after you've had stitched it on with the invisible thread is to actually cut away the back of the bulk of the piece. And, well, we had one that was cut out somewhere.
Okay.
But that's what it is. It's the cutout piece. And then, as you can see, you're left with just the design.
Right.
Then, after this is cut away and taken off, I take the temporary spray adhesive again and spray lightly about 6 to 8 inches away, and then that will hold my bat in place.
Okay.
And at that time, I use a wash-away thread to stitch around from the other opposite side again, and that allows the thread that's like a basting to hold this in place until I get the back onto the quilt.
Okay.
And that way I can go around this, cut away the excess that I have to make it less bulky.
Look at the quilt behind us, because that has a lot of thread work on it, too.
Yes, it does. And when you do the thread work, I like to use the variegated threads because they really lend themselves to all the colors that are in the quilt.
You brought a couple of other quilts with you.
Yes, I did.
Let's take a look at some of those.
The rabbit quilt, it was also done by Carol Ingram of Malvern, Florida. And she is quite an artist, but anyone can actually do this from the shaded pattern. And what we did there, we created a side trip, we call it, instead of the vertical type
I see how that's done.
It's a side, it goes horizontally.
Yep.
And then for those of us who don't want to paint, you can look in for these big prints that they have on some of the fabrics, and use those as your applique, and simply trapunto it the same way you did the painted applique.
Well, they both look great. And did you quilt these on your sewing machine, or did you do them on the long arm, or how do you?
You can do them on the sewing machine, but these were all done on the long arm. And using just the 30-weight rayon thread, the long arm works great.
That's super. And then when you say trapunto, did you go back and actually quilt some around the batting later on?
If you look at the finished one, you can see that certain areas had to be quilted down to make it not just one big lump. It gives it more expression, makes it more look three-dimensional like it should.
Great. Well, let's go back to that room as I'm saying goodbye and thanking you, and take one more look and see how spectacular that transformation was.
have Marilyn Badger with us, and she's going to show us how to customize a pattern to fit in a regular shaped block. Hi, Marilyn.
Hi, Jane. Nice to be here.
I'm glad to have you. What have you brought us to see today?
Well, I'd like to show you how I adapted a pattern to fit into a unique block of this quilt behind me. It's a water lily design.
Yes.
And it's not a typical square shape. So what I did was I traced the area that is the unique shape, which ended up looking like this. Went around the seam lines, just laid this on top of it, and traced it. Then I wanted to adapt my pattern so that it gets down into these areas. So this was my original pattern. You can see it's more for a square or rectangular block.
It doesn't fit down into all those points.
Right. But when I lay this on top of it, I get the center just fine. I just need to get quilting down into these areas. So then I redrew it, and then I'm ready to quilt it. I've got it cut out so that it's this very same shape as this, so that I can transfer it down here, follow it, and line it up with my laser light really easily, because I can just go along those outside points of my pattern where it's cut out and make sure it is situated, each point hits, my needle hits each point when my laser light is on the pattern. When I get it where I want it, then I just tape it down on each side. And if your pattern curls up as you use it, you want to tape those down, because that affects where your laser light hits it.
And then how far do you stay back from the seam edge?
I like to stay at least a hopping foot.
Okay.
Say the one side of the hopping foot. And then once you've got it, I always go all the way around it with my laser light to make sure, before I start stitching, that I'm not going to hit any of those seams. When I'm satisfied with that, then I'll come over and I'll start my pattern.
And you like to start on an inverted area.
Right, I like to start inside corner, never outside in the curves, because you can't come back into those.
Shows less in there.
And it's a good idea to follow your pattern around with your finger or whatever first to know where you're going.
Give it a dry
Turn
run.
it on, right. Even though you have a stitch regulator, it won't stitch as long as you don't move it. You still want to know where you're going. Now I'm going to pick up my bobbin thread, and this is an easier way to do this rather than walking around the machine. I just go right through the neck of the machine with my laser lights on there, hit the trigger in the yellow, and hit it again and bring up my bobbin thread. Now this is kind of slippery thread, so I don't like to back tack it, because it's not going to be that secure, and I don't want to see all the different thread changes in there. So I'm going to knot and bury these when I get done. But I always start with my needle down.
Let's see
and
it sew.
Then I want to trim off the ends a little bit so I don't get tangled up in them too bad, because that will affect the accuracy. And now I'm going to turn my stitch regulator on, which is this trigger green. You hear that ding dong?
Means
Trigger
it's
blue
engaged.
over here, and it means that as soon as I start moving it, it'll start stitching. So it's taking 11 stitches per inch, because that's what I programmed it in to do. So no matter what I do, when I slow down, it slows down. When I speed up, it speeds up.
It kind of works by motion sensing in the wheels, and then it tells the motor just how fast to go.
Yes, there are sensors on the carriage and on the table that kick in and tell the machine when to move and when to slow down. You want to go faster out in those big open curvy areas, because that allows you to be a lot smoother out there. And then you want to be able to slow down to a crawl right inside where the stitching is really tight. So without a stitch regulator, you wouldn't be able to do that, because you're going at a steady rate. So you would lose a lot of accuracy in those tight little areas.
And this time, every stitch will be perfect.
I can, absolutely. So this pattern here, if you were working it with a machine without a stitch regulator, you would have to do some adapting on that inside, because you would never be able to get that kind of accuracy in these tight little centers that I'm about to quilt. And see those two little double lines there? That's very difficult stuff to do when you're going really fast. So
I go right down into the center.
I can go right up to each one of those points and stop. So that just gives me a lot of accuracy. This stitch regulator is going to improve the quality of quilts and shows.
I would say we can do those tiny, tiny little Celtic designs and everything to come out with just perfect stitches.
And you can see how easy I'm moving it. I don't have a hard grip. I'm just basically using the tips of my fingers.
There. Wow, beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
Just a gorgeous design.
So then I can just move the machine over, hit
Look
the
at
blue
that.
button, it cuts my bobbin thread, and just trim off the tops. that will leave enough of a tail that I can pull it up to the top, knot it, and bury it with a self-threading
Wow.
needle.
Thank you for showing that. It is
welcome.
just a marvelous way to get a regular design in there.
It's a lot of fun.
My guest today is a very talented quilter and author, and she is going to be sharing some ideas on snippets. Joining me is Cindy Walters. Welcome, Cindy.
Well, thank you, Donna. Nice to be back.
You know, I think of you as a traditional quilter and a contemporary quilter.
So I love traditional type quilting, but I like contemporary too. So I
Yes.
kind of do both and trade back and forth. And of course, my snippet technique is very contemporary, and the little bit of artist in all of us can come out and shine in the snippet technique.
Oh, well, this is the project I guess we're working on today, and I just think it's so attractive.
Well, thank you. It's very easy, and I want to encourage anyone to try this. It's super, super easy. I'll tell you the supply list we need first. A piece of black for the foundation, and I've cut mine about 18 by 22, but you can make it any size you want, smaller, larger. Then the fabrics that I'm actually going to use for the snippets, for painting with the snippets, I have a couple pieces of green, about 12 by 6, and 3 pieces of my different beautiful cherry print, about 6 by 8 or so. And then, of course, my wonderful fabric that I'm going to use in the border, I have extra pieces of that I'm going to fussy cut the flowers out of and add that, sprinkle it in the bottom of the bouquet.
This is a good project for a beginner, isn't it?
Oh, it's wonderful for beginner. This is a great project. I think anyone will be shocked how fast. Oh, here, I'm going to use that.
Oh, you're going to use
Yeah,
those?
sure.
Okay.
I'm going to use this foundation right here and get started on that. The first thing I have to do after I've collected my fabrics is to pre-fuse it with this newer web. You don't use an iron to pre-fuse. It's pressure sensitive.
Okay.
So it just adheres right onto the web. So to use it, simply just put the fabric on it, press it with your
How
hand.
simple.
Yes. And then with snippets, I cut out all 4 sides to keep the pieces nice and clean, and I don't want any strings or hair. And work on a piece of paper or something to keep your work area nice and neat.
Okay.
And I'm going to just move that for a moment. And to start cutting my snippets, pull the paper off. Don't cut them with the paper on. And this is what makes it so fast and fun. You can simply, I'm going to start my garden with the greenery on the bottom, and you can simply just cut long sweeping pieces. They don't have to attach. I'm just going to put a lot of greenery down on the bottom underneath. And you'll notice I work very freely, and I don't cut my pieces perfectly at all. You can work very precise and cut leaves and make them. And this is what my foundation would look like after I have all my leaves on.
And you know, nature is not so perfect.
No, and
either,
I think
so
it's fun to be loose. The next thing would be cut some of my flowers, and I just can freely cut snippets. This is the true epitome of snippets, where it's just freely cutting. Maybe I'll put some just wildflowers standing up on here, or I can cut out a tulip or other type of flower. By cutting a tulip, I cut a round circle and cut some spears off each side and some straighter pieces. And I'm just going to put the straighter down first. But it's freedom. It's just kind of like free. There's no right or wrong.
And then you get it all set at
Yes,
one
and let me
point?
show you more flowers in here, because then I took and fussy cut some of the beautiful fabrics in my border print and added them on. These are just random shaped spears, just random shaped snippets, not a specific shape at all, but it's about placing color. And once you're satisfied, you're finished.
Now, what do you do next?
Well, you go ahead and steam iron it for 15 seconds, give it
Okay.
a full heat, and then that fusible web is permanent, and you can frame it or finish it off as a quilt. Here I've done some free motion machine quilting and turned it into a quilt.
Now, do most people do the stitching to hold it down?
You don't have to with this web, it's very permanent, but I like to consider thread as one more paintbrush to kind of put a little motion on there. So I like to do a lot of
Now, you did this one on the last show.
I did, but I fell in love with this fabric, so I wanted to recreate it with a different fabric to show you how differently it can work. And so here I have a beautiful flower bouquet, and look how wonderful it is if I put in different border fabrics, even a different basket color in there, and it really can change. So the entire snippet project really is just enjoy it, be free, don't make it so hard, make it easy and fun, and colors are about the most important thing because everything can be random and free.
Oh, well, it's great having you, and as we close, let's go back and take a look at how beautiful these pieces look in the room.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Springtime in the South is a symphony of blooms, and one of the first and most spectacular displays belongs to the dogwood tree. Even before the gray of winter gives over to the green of leaves, the flower of the dogwood trumpets the arrival and glory of spring. Paducahans, of course, had to turn this natural happening into a cultural event. Their pride in their gardens and the beauty of their town inspired the Dogwood Trail celebration. Held early to mid-April since 1964, residents and businesses alike spotlight their dogwood trees, azaleas, and blooming gardens to create this winding 12-mile fairyland trail that is as spectacular at night as it is in the daylight. The event has evolved into a celebration of the arts, with performances by the Paducah Symphony Orchestra, gallery exhibits, and museum tours galore, in addition to the ever-popular annual APQS Quilt Show and Contest. Whether walking, biking, or driving, the Dogwood Trail celebration encourages passers-by to appreciate how nature has favored Paducah with beauty in abundance.
I'd like to give you some tips on ruffling, because I like to add ruffles to my quilts, and I love them all over the house, on draperies, dust ruffles, pillows, everywhere. The best way to cut your fabric for a ruffle is always on the bias. It's a much softer ruffle if you get it done that way. And then how much do you cut? Well, if you ruffle 30 inches down to 10, that's a very full ruffle. If you put 20 inches into 10, that's about average. Another trick is going around the corner of a pillow. If you have a short ruffle, there's not much depth to it, you can get away with just pushing a little bit into the corner to get it around. But if you have a very long ruffle, you have a much farther distance on the outside corner to get around, so you have to bunch up a lot more to get around the corner smoothly so that it won't pull in. This is a ruffling machine, and I just love this. It has a double plate on it so that you can actually run, for instance, your curtain fabric underneath and your cut piece for the ruffle on the top. And you can ruffle the fabric and it'll sew right to the curtain all at the same time, all with the same row of stitching. I hope you'll put ruffles on things. It's an easy, fast way to finish your quilt, and it gives it that feminine touch.
Thanks for watching this episode of Quilt Central, number 209, Tea Time. Join us next time for a stitch back in time, quilting for that vintage look. Quilt around the clock. Visit the Quilt Central website at www.quiltcentraltv.com for more information on this program. Central is made possible in part by Bernina of America. Nothing sews like a Bernina. Nothing. Quilting Machines International, providing quilting machines and supplies for the world. Sulky of America, taking creativity to new heights with decorated threads, stabilizers, and books. American Professional Quilting Systems, hand-guided elegance. Quilter Society, dedicated to promoting today's quilter. Paducah, McCracken County Convention and Visitors Bureau, Paducah, where no one is a stranger. Additional funding was provided by these companies that care about quilting. Celebrate quilting in your everyday living. To purchase videotapes of this or any episode of Quilt Central, you may call 1-866-PADUCAH.